I would say for anyone who's at that intersection of statistics or data science and social science, behavioral science, policy, education science, anyone, to take seriously, don't just try to answer a research question because you happen to stumble upon a cool natural experiment, or, make sure that the questions you're asking are actually relevant to a population. Like if you want to help people who you think are under-resourced or underserved, talk to people in that community and make sure that the questions you're asking are actually relevant, and that you communicate back results. I think there's a lot of time and energy spent on answering questions that I'm not sure are really going to deepen our understanding or help anyone.
Welcome, Jennifer, to the Journeys of Scholars. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Jennifer, you're the professor of applied statistics at NYU, that's New York University, where you are at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. And also you're the director of the Center for Practice and Research at the intersection of information society and methodology. You are one of the co-founders of the first ever professional society devoted to causal inference. And you are also the associate editor for the American Statistician and Journal of Causal Inference, if that's correct. Maybe, yeah. And then you, in your research, you develop various methods, particularly geared towards causal inference. And that part has basically two avenues. One is the first one is to develop this estimator, Bayesian nonparametric methods for flexible estimation. But also the second line of research is that you pursue exploring the impact of various violation of the causal assumptions that we have. So, Jennifer, the first paper I read from you was that paper on the Bayesian modeling, or nonparametric modeling for causal inference in the Journal of Computational and Graphical Statistics. And that at that time, this was, I don't remember the exact year, but that paper is published 2011. I think I read it 2014-ish, and that was one of the first papers I've ever seen that was using causal, at least from my perspective, using causal inference and machine learning. And so at that time,
first.
Yeah, pretty much the first. And this was,
I'd been trying to get that paper published since 2005. Is when I first sent it.
Oh my God! Okay,
so it was a long time coming.
That's a long time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that sort of how the inception of that paper and so on. But really, and that where I saw you first time in person was at the American Causal Inference conference in Montreal, and this was I don't think we ever spoke at that time, but I saw your inauguration lecture and saw some of the other research that you've done. And really where, things were getting really interesting is that not only did you do that, you also, I think it was the first day or the second day of the evening at dinner or at that conference, you assumed stage with none less than Michael Jordan, Mark Glickman, and Don Hedeker, all esteemed statisticians and researchers, and you started to play this, beautiful music. And I just later understood this was the band Errors and Bars, and then I was just baffled. How do you do this great, amazing research at the same time as you're also playing music? So how do you get these things two sides of you? Tell us some more.
Oh well, it's not like we have a gig every week.
Fair enough.
Do a gig once or twice a year at conferences. Actually, Don is in a separate band called the Polkaholics, which is a mix between punk and polka, and they have a much more active schedule. But we get together and we trust that if we're not as polished as a professional band might be, that everyone's gonna be a little gentle with us. So we've got some good audiences, and that's what makes it work. But we all do music in the background in various ways, and everyone has hobbies, right? So
right.
It turns out that those two worlds, collided in kind of a nice way.
Right. I mean, you say everyone has a hobby. I mean, that's what we wish. But I think that the a little bit the problem. Well, maybe it's a problem. I don't know. But we you know, as researchers as we are, we're pursuing, you know, to get better every day. I mean, basically 24 hours a day. Like, how do you even squeeze in a hobby? One can, you know, some of the people in the audience might ask.
No, I think I'm not always good about it. I think actually having the mechanism of the band and shows where I'm going to have to stand up in front of people and sing, it is so terrifying that it motivates me to carve out the time. Right. So sometimes you need that extra thing to motivate you. Just like when you know you have to give a talk on something, you're going to get to a point when you have results. Sure, yeah. It's a similar kind of feeling. It creates an added pressure, whereas you might not carve out the time otherwise. It's good to have those added incentives.
Yeah. No, I see that. And so, I mean, roughly speaking, what are we talking? You guys practice, I don't know, once a week?
The night before. The night before.
Oh, that's amazing. Listen, I must have asked,
practice on our own. I do a lot of karaoke.
I see.
Like back before the pandemic, I used to do single room karaoke in Koreatown in New York. Oh, so I just get a room by myself and do, you know, now I do it in my basement here.
That sounds amazing. So tell us a little bit more about, now, you know, this is not just any band. It's basically a band consisting of, you know, a selection of the probably the greatest statisticians that are alive today. Like, what? how
did we find each other?
Yeah, how did you find? Like, how did you, you know, find each other and decide let's start a band and, you know, stay serious about it at that level of scholarly excellence, which is very hard to. Obviously, the time is limited after all.
Yeah. We actually, so Mark and Michael and I found each other at Bayesian conferences. So Bayesian conferences have a long tradition of having a cabaret. And so we used to perform in the cabaret. Brad Carlin used to run it, and he kind of recruited us in and got us together and, you know, forced us to do things together. And it was fun. You know, I don't think it would have happened without that, actually. So I really, we owe him for that. And then we pulled in Don. I can't remember how Don got pulled in because he's not a Bayesian, although we forced him to go to a Bayesian conference once and perform with us once or twice, maybe. So, yeah, that's it. So we all found each other through statistics. Mark and I have known each other since I was in grad school, since he's you know, came from the same program I did, even though we weren't there at the same time. I see.
That's great. Well, but this, you know, this also sort of highlights one of the first set of, you know, overarching themes about, you know, macro strategies being in academia. You told us about, you know, it's important to have a hobby. We have, you know, well that we assume at least that people have hobbies. And so how do you, just overarchingly, and then, you know, moving into the field of trying to be human being in a field where you are supposed to be almost like a robot producing, you know, high level research at a very high pace, and then, you know, one has families, one have hobbies. So what's your, you know, overarching principle when you think about these things?
The perfect is the enemy of the good, maybe.
Right.
I mean, I was getting tenure as a single mom when I was getting so I was wow,
that's amazing.
And people would say, like, how do you do that? How do you parent by yourself? And then you know, and I basically said I do everything half-assed, which isn't totally true, and I'd like to believe it's not, but it's there's an element of lack of perfectionism that can be useful. And collaborating with people who have strengths that you don't have. So I tend to collaborate with people who do have attention to detail and who do have better programming skills than I do. I do a lot of collaborations with Vince Story. We've written a bunch together, and we just have very different skill sets, but it works. Right. So finding good collaborators who balance out, you know, I like to do the writing and the big idea work and the vision, and he really likes more of the nuts and bolts, but he's also will catch my typos and things like that. So.
Well, and so when it comes to then, you know, when it comes to, I mean, research wise, we'll talk a little bit more about basically the your idea generate, how you generate ideas and so on, and but also how you navigate basically saying no. And I think that's like, how do you say no and say yes to different projects, because that's part of the a skill set that one has to sort of develop, but not also saying no to everything. You have to be really tuned, have extra sensory, basically perception or whatever, to catch whether something might be a good yes or no. But what's your, walk us through a little bit.
I'm not good at it. I've gotten slightly better, but I mean, I can point to many examples of things I didn't want to get involved with, which ended up to be fantastic. Things I did want to get involved with that ended up to be, I think it's sometimes hard to predict. And so the key is, I guess, to, at worst case, extricate yourself from something that's really not working out.
Yeah.
Case in a situation where it's not really meeting your expectations is to try to really figure out why.
Yeah.
So you, to the extent that you cannot make the same mistake. And even in situations where you're not loving the work as much as you thought you would, or it's not turning out quite the way you thought, there are always lessons to be learned, right? So what can you draw from this that maybe wasn't what you expected to, but there's still interesting things there. And maybe that leads to the next research project in a different direction than you would have.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a little bit just staying, basically, I'm trying to summarize what you're saying. So staying a little bit tuned towards, why is it going wrong? Why is it going good? Also, I guess when it's going good, you want to understand why that is happening. But also that, sometimes, me being an not football, soccer player, you have to endure a lot of training, right? And is like any sports, you have to train, and a lot of it is not fun, right? You just go out running, and you feel like a little bit of a blood taste in you, because you're running really, but you get better at it, right? You get sort of this sort of training where you enhance your capacity to maybe operate in a certain field. So where do you feel like now I need to this is just like a moment where we are learning together jointly, but it is hard, versus I need to probably withdraw because this is not leading anywhere. Like, is there like an intuition, like, oh, you see what I'm trying to get at? Basically, some situations they look bad, but they're just part of the training or the process.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. And you can always, to the extent that you've made a commitment, you always at least follow through on the first paper or whatever it is, but you can play a different role in future. So if it's a big project that was meant to lead to 4 or 5 papers, and you get a sense after one that like, this is not a great, often it comes down to just collaboration style.
Yeah.
And I've learned over the years that certain types of people, they may be lovely people, it's not the right style for me. So figuring out who has a complementary style, or, who has the same kind of feelings about how quickly things should get done, who's going to play what roles, how accountability works.
And so that's really interesting. The collaboration style is one thing, that you can have 2 really good collaborators independently, but just because they have different styles, it might not work out. So if you want to share like maybe a story or an example of how those styles play out. You already mentioned this, not maybe, you're thinking about the big picture ideas, and then your collaborators think about the more specific ones. That's probably one type of style, I guess. So, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it just has to do with where people are in their career and how much they need to be getting papers out. And so, I was joking about being half-assed, but I'm probably somewhere more in the middle. Like, I know there are people who are more perfectionists, and everything has to be 100%. You have to explore every option, go down every rabbit hole before you can publish a thing. Other people just want to do I was working on a project years ago with a student who we went down one avenue trying to look at the properties of this estimator. To me, uncovered that there were about 5 others.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to go down those. So I was like, okay, it can go the other way too. And I was like, well, I don't really feel like we can publish this unless we look at all these other areas too. And so finding someone who's at the right level, finding someone, I was trying to collaborate with an economist once who said, well, we can only publish in these 3 journals. And I was like, well, that's not my goal in life. My goal is to like answer the question we want to answer, and then we'll find a home for it that'll be appropriate. But this idea that, well, we can, it only counts for me if it's in these 3 journals.
I see.
Not a good fit.
So it's a bit, I see that flexibility, like being, it sounds like you have much more flexibility in your career, at least how things are standing right now. How was it in the beginning? If you think about Jennifer in the beginning, like it was, if you would like, go back in time and visit Jennifer then, would she say the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely speaking from a position of privilege on a number of dimensions right now that I did not. I had some of those dimensions. Being a white person in the U.S. gives you a whole lot of privilege that I would not have had otherwise. I had the luxury of going to good institutions, so that I had that check mark next to my name that probably counted for more than it should have, which I don't think I really appreciated at all or enough at the time. But I didn't have tenure. And when you don't have tenure, it can be harder to feel like you can say no to things. But I got really lucky. I came close to leaving academia after graduate school because I was really burnt out, and I don't think I had like the best graduate school experience.
Okay.
And I just thought, I don't want to do, and I looked around at the lives of the people I saw, and I thought, I don't want to be that. But I ended up doing a postdoc at the School of Social Work at Columbia. Which no one thought I should do. I actually had a tenure track offer from University of Washington that I said no to, which everyone thought I was crazy for, but that's what I did. And it ended up being a fantastic decision because I had a mentor, Jane Waldfogel, who's an economist. She was my supervisor. She was the epitome of work-life balance. She worked really hard. She got big grants. She did great work, but her weekends were her weekends, and she spent time with her kid and her husband. And she was a lovely, lovely role model for that. And I thought, oh, I could do that. if that's what being an academic could look like, then I could do that. So that was enormously helpful. So she was a great collaborator. I collaborated during that time with a woman named Nabila El-Basal, who's an amazing researcher who does work at the intersection of HIV and interpersonal violence and intravenous drug use, and which is like 3 really hard things. And she wanted to see what happens when people are struggling with all 3 at once. And she'd go into communities and do randomized experiments. And like she would be going to the ER to recruit people for the study at 2 a.m. Like she just took a lot of ownership. Wow. Over her work in ways that she was also a tremendous role model, and just they wanted me to help them with their missing data, I think, at the time. And so, okay. And I didn't know anything, and they were just super kind to me. And so oddly, having that social work experience, which is not probably typical, I learned to do check-ins at the beginning of meetings, all these things that were not part of the stat culture, but were very much part of the social work culture in terms of just being caring people. It was I think influenced me a lot in retrospect.
That's amazing. There's so many paths here to unpack, basically, or many choices to unpack here, Jennifer. So you basically went to grad school. So we can maybe we can come back to the collaboration theme, because that's sort of an important theme, I think, for people like to think about that. But you think about your trajectory. I believe you started off in economics, right? And then you was a BA in economics, right? And then you went into statistics, and then after that you did a PhD in statistics at Harvard. And so, what was like thinking about your choice? Like, what took you from economics to statistics? But then also later on, but this is something we can see today in your work, but also that's something you speak about, which is the social science part or social work that you come back to. So Just walk us through a little bit, help us untangle those choices that you made.
Yeah, so I was an econ major in college. I graduated wanting to be the CEO of a corporation. I was going to go business school and law school. I had taken the LSAT, and I was just going to work for a couple of years because those schools, tend to be the types of schools where they want you to have some business experience.
Yeah.
In the business world for a couple of years, hated it. And then this is crazy. I did this series of tests, like day and a half of testing at this organization that I think still exists called Johnson O'Connor, in New York City, where they give you a battery of all different kinds of tests, from like spatial reasoning to inductive and deductive reasoning to memory, like how good you are at memorizing languages, to like these crazy extensive tests about all different kinds of cognitive abilities. And then they say at the end of it, these would be good professions for you.
Oh, really? So they basically allocate you based on those tests. Okay, interesting.
Exactly. And so they I had taken almost no math in college. I'd taken calculus or something, and all of a sudden they're saying physics, engineering, I think statistics on the list, architecture. Wow. And so I'd interviewed people from a bunch of different professions, and I met an epidemiologist who was amazing. I cannot remember her name, but she was great. That was what kind of led me towards statistics.
I see. So the test sort of worked, or was it?
No, a day and a half of testing is a lot of testing.
That's amazing. And so you went into statistics, and then you did your master's in statistics, and then you went to Harvard. So what was it? The move from was it Rutgers University? Yeah. And then you went to. What was the jump?
Dipping my toe in the water at Rutgers, to make a big, to go from where I was undergrad to straight to a PhD would have been a little nuts. So, so doing, I lived in state. It was reasonable, but they have great faculty. So, so I got a great education there, I think, and I did well. And I was like, oh, I could do this. And I bolstered my math, which I had not, really had before. Really turns out to be didn't maybe bolster it enough to really prepare me for graduate school. But And
then you went into Harvard. So what was that? Why Harvard? And did you apply to other places? And so statistics, now we understand. Obviously this was tests, and you tried it out really deeply, and then you liked it, and then you moved on. So what was the logic between moving?
I think I applied to places that didn't require the math subject test GRE. Except for Chicago, I also applied to, even though they did, because I forgot that I don't know, attention to detail. So they luckily let me in anyway. And I definitely benefited. Should I say this out loud? Yeah, I don't know. I think I benefited from the fact there were very few women in statistics at that point. So they probably let me in, with a different standard. I had gone to Swarthmore undergrad and I'd done fine, but still, I don't know if I would get in today. So I got lucky there. And then, I got a great education, I think. It was just, I was there with international math Olympiads, right. So people who are just, leaps and bounds ahead of me math wise. And so that was rough. So, and my essay was all about how I wanted to do social policy work. So the other thing is I'd gone back and done work while I was doing my master's. I worked with one of my Swarthmore professors, a man named Rob Hollister, who passed away recently. Amazing. And he did all the social policy work. He collaborated a lot with mathematical policy research and all this program evaluation, social policy. And so he was an economist. So we wrote a paper together about community-wide initiatives and why it's hard to do causal inference in those settings. And I think that was the thing that really pushed me to. So I wrote my essay about, how missing data and causal inference are important. So at that time, I think Don Rubin was probably one of the few people doing that kind of work. So when I got in, the places I got in, it was kind of an obvious choice.
Right. And so now it's making sense. So the causal inference part sort of came through the policy evaluation, social policy in general, interested in interventions and so on. And this was, but your interest, like for social science, but also social policy specifically, it was already there because you studied economics, right? So I guess you had some sense for.
A little bit, yes, yes. Again, that same professor who I worked with later, I took a class from him in something like social policy. And that introduced some of the ideas of causal inference, and I thought, oh, that would be a cool way to actually make, have some contribution to the world in ways that might work better with my skills than, say, me being a social worker.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so there are two questions here. One, which is a little bit more specific, and the second one is about the trajectory forward with, once you entered the graduate school at Harvard. Let me start with the most specific one. So you expressed that you didn't have that sort of math skill compared to the math Olympiad people applying to Harvard and so on. So that's question number. Like, how did you make sure to train yourself to become better in math? I mean, obviously you're, one of the greatest statisticians today. Like, going from there to where you are today, that must have taken a lot of extra training, basically. So tell us a little bit about how you thought about that, or was it just going through graduate school and then hoping for the best, or how did?
A combination. So I think when I arrived, it became clear that I didn't really have the background that was necessary for the first year classes.
Yeah.
So I tell this story to students, and I run a master's program. And so when I have students who are struggling with the curriculum, I'm like, oh, I was that person, I get it. So I actually took a year. I delayed some of my courses for a year, like the really theoretical probability and inference sequence. And, learned real analysis and a smattering of complex analysis and things like that. I had been, I'd taken like linear algebra and multivariate calc before I got there. So I'd done that while I was at Rutgers, but and basically it was just hard. It was just hard. And I cried a lot. I worked really hard, and I did fine, but I'm never going to be on the proving theorems part of statistics, because it's not where my skill set lies. But I realized that there are other ways of contributing, right? And actually creativity ends up being a big thing, and understanding how to build partnerships with people is a big thing. And there are lots of choosing interesting research questions that people care about is an undersold public good. So anyway, so I think one nice thing about graduate school was that they involved you in research projects from your first semester. You're teaching from the first semester, or at least at that point in time. I don't know what it looks like now. And you're doing research in your first semester. And so I always had a sense of, these things I could be good at. I could see that in the future. I just needed to jump through the hoops.
Right. This is so fascinating, because I sort of can recognize myself. I mean, I'm not a statistician, although it's sort of one side of me, the other side of me is in that field, being more and more, thinking more and more like a statistician. But I realize, reading those technical papers, like, we don't have, as a social scientist, you don't have that, you don't get that training to think and read at that level, and also produce mathematical proofs, as you just alluded to, in the way that is efficient. I mean, I can walk through the proof and I can probably do it, but it will just take too much time to do it efficiently, right? And if I would dedicate myself, probably, that will work, but still, it's not efficient use. But you could then revert to basically what you're saying. I'm now summarizing a little bit what you're saying. So there are other problems in that field of statistics that you could then relate to. So this is the creativity part, relating it to other maybe applied problems, or teaming up with people that usually you wouldn't team up with, in a way that yields new knowledge.
Yeah.
So this is really helpful, I believe, and you see this. So maybe we go back a little bit in time. So the several paths. So maybe you graduate school, you've done your first year, second year, and this was now, going into probably choosing your topic a little bit more firmly. And you worked, Don Rubin, I guess, was involved. Gary King was.
I worked with Carl Morris for my first year, and then I started working with Don because he had a project that he was starting that was a good fit for me.
At that time, Gary was there. Gary King was there as well.
I met later in my time there because I started going to this like weekly seminar that he organized that I think maybe still exists, where they get people from different disciplines. And
right.
So he was on my committee. It was. But Don got me involved in several different projects that ended up being instrumental in the work that I did. So that was great.
And so then social science side was part of it, and then eventually, so say towards say the end of your PhD, you told us that you had worked really hard. It was sort of a little bit of a burnout situation. So what, like, I guess, I mean, Harvard is intense. So I mean, it is an intense environment, but I guess it was also that you didn't know if you wanted to stay in academia versus to leave, that sort of aggravated that feeling of a burnout. And so what was
if I
it?
left, I would have done quasi-academic. So I probably would have gone to like a program evaluation firm. So like mathematical policy research, or I think I had an offer from Rand at that time, that kind of place. And that might have been a really good fit for me as well. I think, I know people at those firms, and I work with them once in a while. And, I think there are some fabulous people at those places. It just would have meant, I think it's hard to go down that path and then come back to academia. So my thought was, well, let me stay in that. Let me give it another shot with a postdoc. The postdocs are great, by the way, I think. So they really give you a chance. I got a lot of work done during my postdoc. So that when I started being an assistant professor, I gave birth to my daughter like in the April before I started. I had maternity leave, and actually they gave me maternity leave for the first semester too. So starting with a new baby, and overwhelming, but I had all these papers coming out because I had done the postdoc.
I see.
So it really took some of the pressure off, which I helped enormously.
So what advice would you give to people standing like on the verge of finishing their graduate school, feeling a sense of burnout for various reasons, thinking about industry versus staying in academia? If you would draw some lessons from your experience, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say, just the rule that it's once you leave, it's hard to come back. If you get promised by a job that they're going to let you spend a day a week doing your own work so that, you can write papers, maybe that'll happen. I don't know. I just think it's very hard to come back. On the other hand, there are tons of important and wonderful jobs that are not in academia. So we're on the verge of my group starting a new PhD program. The name is still being decided, but it'll be something around computational social science. And one of the arguments we're trying to make is that NYU is not going to like this, but we shouldn't train people just to go into academia. There are a lot of, there are a lot of PhD students out there. There are a lot of people getting PhDs who maybe don't need to. There's a lot of great work to be done just with a master's level. And there are a lot of important jobs that are not in academia. So, try to figure out what you like. If you think you may not want to stay in academia, try to do an internship at the kind of place you might want to be. So you look, sometimes it seems great from the outside, but when you spend time there, it's not so great. And sometimes it's the opposite. Like you're not sure that would be a good fit, and you spend a summer there or something and realize, oh, actually, this could be a really good home for me.
Right. So a little bit more of exploration, basically, exploration, exploitation type of trade-off. If you're unsure, whenever in doubt, explore a little bit more before taking the decision, because it is quite hard to come back, especially at the level of performance that you have shown after that. After you decided to stay, which was, what was it tenure itself that made you stay? Or it must have been more than that, I guess.
It was the postdoc I did and feeling like, oh no, I can like this. And then my first job was at a policy school. So that's another different kind of choice I made. I never wanted to be in a stat department. I knew that was not going to be a good fit for me because they would want me to publish papers, all the time in JASA and prove theorems. I think stat departments are changing a bit, but that was kind of the norm, and that was not something I was interested in. And so I took a job at the policy school at Columbia, and that was fine. I was just, the downside of these kinds of positions often is that I was an isolated statistician. And so it was a little hard not having my people. And then when the job came up at NYU, the advertisement was, oh, that's me. They're talking about me. It just felt like, I wasn't, but it felt like it was written for me. And now, I'm in this group of lovely people, some of them statisticians by training, others in adjacent fields. Right, and they're just, we're a little bit of an island of misfit toys, but it works. And I have wonderful colleagues. So, and every time people come visit and they hang out with my colleagues, they say, you have wonderful colleagues. Yes, I do.
Well, it would be fantastic to visit one day, Jennifer. It would be fantastic. As a social scientist interested in computational social science in general, that's where, I feel my home is. And is it a little bit of a, as you say, misfit? It's like a combination of different people meeting in some, some non-traditional disciplinary boundaries that make it hard to have like one target. It's very easy to be economist or statistician or, whatever, like a traditional one, in the sense that you have your audience, you have your community defined, you have the way paved for you already. But now there's no, you're like basically walking the jungle and just trying to stay away from those deadly snakes. But also simultaneously learning, finding this amazing place to think new ideas, produce new knowledge that wouldn't have been possible without that combination. So maybe we go back a little bit about this collaboration part, Jennifer, and also this sort of leadership part, which is another common theme that I would love to talk about. So collaboration in general is, you've written papers solo. The 2011 paper that I referred to earlier was written solo, but then you collaborate a lot with Andrew Gelman and so on and so forth, with other people, esteemed colleagues in the field. So what's your sort of sense for when to move solo, when to move collaborative?
These days, I don't really have any desire to do much solo. Most problems are too complex to do a good job solo, I think. At least the problems I'm interested in. You really need a team. You need a subject matter expert if it's a collaboration in the social sciences or behavioral sciences or any of, anything that's outside the bounds of pure statistics. But I just think we learn a lot more when we're working in teams. It's just, I'm not going to be able to have all the ideas myself. So even if it's a purely methodological research agenda, I still want someone who's a better programmer than me. I want someone, I can't program in C++. I can't, there's just a lot of things that I'm not going to, I don't want to learn how to do at this stage. Not going to be good at, right? So, and so I like working with people who have a variety of skills who are going to bring different perspectives to bear that will help me think of things that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Right.
So I think it's like, for instance, I'm working on this project now. I'm building a software tool that basically creates a highly scaffolded user interface to my BART for causal inference. It's got BART for causal inference under the hood, but it's this very, pretty kind of user interface that makes it easy for people who have less technical backgrounds. And then we've embedded into it learning modules so that if you don't understand what's going on under the hood, we're piece by piece building up learning modules so that you can understand more about causal inference or whatever. Anyway, we've got all these different people on the team, and everyone brings something different, right? And so like when we've got a learning scientist on the team who asks questions that none of the rest of us would have asked, right? They're like, ooh, that's a good point, right?
Basically, like how people learn about new things.
Right. So there's just, I think humility is an undersold quality in academia, right? Because we're trained to do the opposite. We're trained to pretend that we think we're always right. And, you don't learn that way.
Yeah.
You don't
Oh,
want that.
it's an excellent point. And also, this brings me to another question, which I like to ask, which is that I don't know if you read this book by Adam Grant, which is called Give and Take. So it's about different modes of collaboration. And now basically it's a you can think about people being in three types of bins: takers, givers, and matchers. And it's a heuristic, really. It's ideal types. But where you have people that tend to take more in collaborations, and you have people that tend to give more in collaborations, and those who tend to match. Well, basically, you give X, I give X as well, and I don't give more until you give a little bit more. And so, how do you, like, in terms of collaboration and leadership, how do you navigate these personalities?
Try to avoid the takers. You don't always know someone's going to be a taker. Oh boy, does that resonate? Yeah, and then it becomes clear.
Yeah.
It would be great if you could like give people a little assessment before you agree to start working with them to help understand. I think if I could figure that one out better before I started collaboration, I would have made some different choices. Although sometimes you end up with a taker and you're getting other things out of it that you wouldn't, right? Otherwise, like you would never have gotten access to this organization or this data or whatever were it not for that person. So it's complicated, the trade-offs, but I think even across projects, there are probably some projects where I appear to be a taker more, and taker, maybe not necessarily a taker, but I certainly have collaborations where people are extraordinarily respectful of my time, maybe too respectful, and really only carve out the piece I need to do. Love those collaborations. Right. So I try not to abuse that, but like, it's great where there are other ones where like I'm showing up every week and feeling like, wait, am I doing other people's jobs too? It's hard, and it's hard to know where, what's an appropriate amount. There's no manual for this.
No, really. This is why I think this is a critical question to talk about. At least I don't think there is an easy solution, like, do this when you meet that. I mean, there are no rules to do that. If there were, we would be in a different situation. But it's something that I would guess that anyone through their stages in career meets different types of individuals with different ages, different interests. Being to some extent, you could categorize them in these three bins, roughly speaking. It's just a heuristic, right? It's not easy to say like you're just a taker. You might be a taker in one domain, but giver in another domain, right? You maybe giving more in academic collaborations, but maybe you take more in family relationships. I mean, I don't know. Like there could be many combinations of
or even within academia. I can definitely see myself playing different roles. I think it also recognizing your positionality in a setup. If you've got a lot more power than someone else, trying to be very mindful of that and mindful that other people may have a hard time setting boundaries with you. And so I think that's a really important one to remember. So, I mean, that's a benefit maybe of having been in situations where I had less power, where I felt like I was getting more exploited, to remember when I'm on the flip side, never to do that.
Right.
To really endeavor not to ever do that to someone else.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, you can think about it from a graduate student perspective versus professor, where a professor, thinks he or she knows more about a topic. Well, we obviously by experience would assume that, right? But then, the input, the graduate student ends up doing, 90% of the work, but with those 10%, it might be, really, really worth a lot. So in terms of hours invested for the professor, it might be tiny little, so it looks like it's a taker, but maybe just to nuance this sort of statement of takers, givers, and matchers. But in terms of your leadership style, I mean, you are also the director of PRIISM, right? PRIISM, you pronounce it PRIISM, yes.
Yep, PRIISM, yeah.
Where I'm assuming, seeing a lot of different personalities, and so as your leadership style, navigating this? I mean, how would you, if you see these types of conflicts, or maybe is that, you know, something that you would recognize as something is not totally right in terms of exploitation, something maybe being a little bit more exploited in terms of time and so on. What's the, you know, how do you navigate that as a leader?
Yeah, that's interesting. It doesn't come up so much in that role. Once in a while, you know, conversations need to be had, but I'm not so much in the nitty gritty of everyone's research that I even know that much what's happening. So it maybe comes up a little more. I also run a master's program, co-direct a master's program. And I think it comes up more there in conversations around, you know, what can we expect from our students? What I mean, it's all this came up during the pandemic. What can we reasonably expect that people will do? How do we know if they're like not showing up to class, if they're really sick or not? How realistic do you want to be about those things? I feel like I enter more into the realm there. I mean, I would say the bit of leadership experience I've had mostly makes me think that I would never want to be a dean or anything like that, because I think you do spend a lot of your time negotiating that. You know, again, I've had to do a bit of it, even just managing like staffing issues, for the master's program, and it's not my favorite thing. I'm not on the side of I only ever want to do my work. I can never get involved in politics. I've certainly gotten involved in various politics, but mostly I don't love that piece of it. And the problem in academia, which is maybe true in other sectors of the world as well, is that none of us were trained to be managers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We just
mostly people are trained by people who are not good managers, and then they are not good managers themselves.
Right.
So it leads to a fair amount of dysfunction that it feels like could be, you know, it doesn't seem wholly necessary. So I try to learn from the people who I think are really good managers and try to emulate what they do.
Right. How do you do that? You bring them on board? I mean, reading books is one thing, but
it's more that, you know, I'm on a million committees or whatever. And so if you're on a committee that's run really well, then, you know, like, oh, I see. They have an agenda for their meetings. Fascinating, right? Or, you know, and maybe sometimes it's a matter of like taking that person out to lunch or something and like, tell me more about how you learned to do this way. And we certainly all have seen bad managers. So there are a lot of examples of what not to do, but sometimes it's hard to know, you know, what to do that is positive. Right.
So what would, you know, if you would share, this one might be a little hard to give just an example out of the blue, but what would be like bad managerial style? Or what would, you know, what advice you feel like this is something I really want you guys to take with you?
Not listening. Not having an agenda. All meetings should have agendas. You know, anything that's not respectful of people's time or their position or their inability to say no to you. I'm trying to be much, much better now about not emailing people on the weekend unless it's like a student who I work with where we've explicitly talked about actually the weekend is the better time for me or whatever. So I think mostly it comes down to those traits. You want to. The dogs are barking.
That's fine.
I think there's probably delivery and they will.
Okay, that's fine. Actually, it's not coming through as
you're not hearing it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like I'm not being as coherent as I would like on this question, but because I'm also trying to be very careful of what I say.
Yeah, well, you know,
as you can imagine.
No names need to be mentioned.
No, I know, but it's a small place, right?
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're conditioning on information that is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, these things are. It's So for me, for example, going from graduate to associate to like senior associate and so on, like you transition from where you see yourself working more sort of alone and maybe in small collaborative teams, but then more and more finding yourself in larger consortia of people, and that's sort of part of the equation to figure out how to lead. Leading by management or leading by research, meaning that you write. You're sort of the name to go to in this field, and so you lead through example by research example. But then you have this sort of leadership, more managerial types, like how do you organize a meeting and so on and so forth. And so that's I think this is, at least for me, and I think others in my position, a little bit of a conundrum, like basically how to think about that problem is even, and as you say, we're not even trained for it, so it's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely thought about it more on the managerial side in terms of like leading as a scholar.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm good at that. In fact, I've been told over and over again that I don't sell my work enough. And, I'm not, I try to do it more now, but, these days, so many people have their own websites and here's all the amazing work I'm doing.
Right.
So not my personality.
Yeah.
And I've just basically decided that's okay. I'm not on social media. I don't, once in a while I'll send something on LinkedIn if I really want to promote something, but that is about, that's more about like, if there's a job in our unit or things like that, or if I want to get students for our master's program. But I would say I'm not great at that. And maybe that's okay for the world.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need more dominant personalities or more. The problem is that those people then tend to get more success.
Right.
Okay.
It's a little bit like that question about takers givers, but also collaboration in general. How do you set it up?
Yeah, and you have to think about what makes you happy, right? Do you need everyone to think that you're the best in X, Y, or Z? I mean, I know that's the game we're playing in academia, so it skews all of our personalities at least slightly in that direction. But I know plenty of people who just like to do their job. They just want to do their research because it's interesting to them,
right?
Not to see how many, Google Scholar citations they can get or retweets of their post or whatever. I think we've leaned too heavily in that direction, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, we are in this very highly digitized world. Everything is sort of visible in a way, which is good if you're trying to research. You don't have to go to the library all the time. You can download things, but it's also really bad in terms of social media and all this sort of creating a lot of hype around people that is to some extent also artificial.
Sure.
So how do you, maybe, talking about that social media part, and so if we move on a little bit more towards those micro strategies in terms of, you're organizing your, time and week and so on. I think the most critical question I would like to start with there is creating space for deep work. I mean, how do you, in this highly digitized world, emails, social media, how do you do that? Because in the end, we really need to just sit and do the work. Right, we need to just sit down and do it and create that moment of for deep reflection. So how does
almost all the deep work gets done on the weekend, which is not great. My kid is now 20, so I have the luxury of doing that more now than I could at other points in my life.
Yeah.
But I also, my week is much more scheduled than it was at other points in my life. Right. I put everything on my to-do list is on my Google Calendar. So if I need to work on this project for 3 hours, I put it on my calendar now, and I try really hard, like don't schedule meetings then. I'm in a writing group where, the time is scheduled. I don't set other meetings then. Except for today, I'm missing writing group today for this. So I'm lying as I say it. But in general, I try to carve out time. Actually, when I scheduled this, we hadn't set up the schedule. That'll be my fault. But, carve out the time and honor it.
Yeah.
And if you have other people, so like, I love that this writing group thing we started maybe a year and a half ago or so. just people who are faculty members in the center I run who were feeling like they couldn't find time to write.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, what if we just set up like 2 hours a week? Sometimes it's 2 hours a week. In the summer, we do 4 hours a week, where that's time that's privileged that you're not going to schedule. And for many of us, it's been game changer is too strong a word for it, but really important for actually making sure things get done.
That's really interesting. So, and that writing, so it's basically you zoom in, or what's the procedure?
We zoom in, we check in, depending on what's happening in the world. That check-in could be 3 minutes or 20. We try to keep it short, but sometimes it's just things to discuss. But I think that mental health piece is actually probably important too. We set our intentions, we write till the next hour break, we check in, how's it going? Whatever, just check in for 3 minutes, write for another hour, check in right at the end.
And then you mute yourself, I guess, or what?
Yeah, usually we mute, and most people take themselves off camera.
Oh, I see. And then you go for a break.
Possible, but the intention is that we're all supposed to. We're not answering email during that time.
Oh,
you're not doing, making a doctor's appointment, whatever, you're not doing personal stuff. You're not doing the dishes. You're not sending 15 emails. You are working on that paper that you're struggling to get out the door.
And that's the accountability part, is basically I'm stating my purpose for the writing for this hour, and then I'm basically reporting back after the session and see how I and that's really fascinating. I've heard about these sort of writing groups that help for that type of research. I mean, I think it sounds like a really interesting. This you do like once every week.
Typically during the year it's once a week, and in the summer we do twice a week.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so so that you do like 3 hours. So what's for Jennifer, like writing, I guess like 3 hours a week is not enough. Must be more happening.
No, that's right. And definitely more is happening, but often that's happening at night and weekends. Although this semester, actually, don't tell my collaborators, but I have a slightly less scheduled. I don't have like 7 hours of Zoom calls a day. I've got a little more chunks. So I'll just put a 2 hour window, make like my own personal writing group, right? Here's a 2 hour window here. Here's a 1 hour window there. Right. I'm going to get this thing done. And if I don't get it done, I just move the calendar thing over to when I do. So it's like my constantly evolving to-do list hangs out on my calendar. So I don't, and if I've got like a tenure letter to write for someone, then I put in a reminder the week before, tenure letter due in a week, better get started. I mean, this isn't like a mind-blowing.
No, I mean, it's basically time blocking. Yeah.
And I'm sure there are people who have better strategies. It's just, and it's not perfect, but it's working for me better than other times in my life.
Yes, it's basically making sure to block off time and try to defend that time. And once writing, those more, how you say, softer types of slots that if you have a meeting for then it's appearing on your calendar, and then it's sort of a hard slot. You see, I have to have that meeting. But if you put it in the writing sessions in the calendar, it becomes more sort of visible, harder sort of to say to shift. Yep. So it's basically time blocking. I think that.
And if you schedule a meeting during that time, you have to make time for that task at another point in your week. So the trade-off is super clear.
Okay, that's right. And you have sort of a set sum that you want to aim for a week. So I don't know, 10 hours writing, or and you try to divide that up.
I think it's just a matter of kind of looking ahead at who really, which collaborator do I owe more to at this point? That's another good thing with collaborators, is that they tend to. I mean, sometimes I'm the collaborator who's pestering everyone, but it's good to not be the engine on all projects and have other people who are pestering you too.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of coding and so on, I mean, you take leadership over the writing, it sounds like, and now maybe you do less of coding. In the past, you did probably more coding. And so you have that chunked into the writing, or is that could be a separate chunk for coding, or
That
how do
would
you?
be a separate chunk. Yeah. So I do some coding more when I'm consulting with people.
Yeah.
I did this data analysis competition last spring, which was crazy. And I was doing like 10 or 15 hours of coding a week. That was the most I'd done in a long time. And using like the high performance computing cluster and all that. That was just, I just didn't sleep a lot.
Okay, so you did it yourself. That's wonderful.
No, we was a team, but there was so much to be done.
Oh, I see.
And they were there. I would say two of my team members, my research director George, and again Vince Story, were doing the heavy lifting, but I was doing some of it. And I don't, I'm just not as skilled anymore at programming as I used to be because I just don't do it as much. So it was a little painful, but good.
Yeah, it's sort of a use it or lose it situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have when you wake up, do you have like a set, okay, I should wake up at 7 and then, go to bed this or that hour, or how do you think about that?
I want to wake up at a time that will allow me to start the workday at 9.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm answering emails or whatever before that. So, for me, that's probably 8:15 or so. I'm getting up. So that's not, I mean, I when my daughter was in high school, I was getting up every day at 6:15. So 8:15 feels luxurious. But some people that would seem late and some people that would seem early. I don't know.
Right. It depends. Like, if you cross time zones, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just really the hours of sleep or the hours of wake.
Yeah. And I'm a big sleeper. So I would love to get 9 hours a night. I don't usually because I have insomnia. But when I have insomnia, I just do my pleasure reading. So it kind of works out.
It averages correctly.
Yeah, you want to fit in. People who say they don't have time to read a book, just get yourself some insomnia and you'll carve out those 2 hours in the middle of the night.
And this insomnia thing, is it you have like had it for some years, or something that developed with
I think it's developed over the years. I think it used to stress me out more, and now I just feel like, I guess that's when I'm getting my me time. So fine.
Right.
I'm still, even when there may be nights when I only get 4 or 5 hours, but I would say overall I'm still probably averaging 7.5 to 8 hours a night. So
okay,
it's really important.
That's pretty good. So yeah. So and then you probably go to bed around, I'm just guessing now, like 10, 11 p.m. or something like that to get that. Those are okay. Yeah, something like that. And then organizing your, like, you have the terms of days, Monday to Fridays and weekends, and you do some writing in the weekends, you say, and now probably you didn't do in the past when your kid was still small. But do you have a sense for you plan to say, oh, this day is dedicated to this project or that thing here?
Yeah. Again, I'll schedule the weekends too with what projects are, and remember, you have to respond to these 3 people, spend 3 hours, editing this paper Saturday afternoon, and on Sunday, go through, grade this or write this tenure letter for someone, or do the programming that you owe for the consulting project or whatever.
Yeah. I see. And do you have like a dedicated resting day or afternoon? I mean, this is like from a Swedish perspective, we tend to try to take the Saturdays and Sundays off. You mentioned your mentor, this epidemiologist. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't have a great, I keep trying to move towards taking more time off. Around the pandemic, I took very, very little, and that was not great. I think not this past summer, but last summer, I think I didn't take any vacation time. I took 1 week where I didn't do meetings, but that's not, I don't ever want to do that again. So, this summer I actually took some whole weekends off, and I took a full week off for vacation. That was good. It's almost like the how do I make time for singing. It's
Right. I was going to ask.
I build in external things. So I've got,
Yeah.
friends who I have just regular
Mhm.
phone calls with, or friends who I have regular dinners with, or so my friends and my family, my mother is close here, so I spend time with her, and my sister. So I privilege taking time off usually when it's around spending time with family or spending time with friends.
I see.
I don't do as much as I probably should. That's just, even though like I'm an introvert to the extreme, so I really like spending time by myself.
Yeah.
And if I don't get enough of it, it's not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
But mostly I have to kind of almost schedule that or incentivize it as well. Like I'm gonna spend time singing today. I'm gonna spend time doing something else, whatever. I'm learning how to play drums.
Oh, that's great.
I'm not good.
But then that also goes into the scheduling, right? Now, like drum Sunday, this and that.
Schedule.
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of to-do lists and try to sort of schedule them in this sort of long thing of like, things that you want to do now and later, but then you also want to fit them into the time blocking, which I think I'm doing a little less so. But I think that's a good recipe for trying to, like, in the end, basically we are human beings on a time scale, and the time scale needs to be, sort of encoded with certain information about what one should be doing. Otherwise, it's easy for even a to-do list to be floating around in a way that is not so concrete. And so emailing and so on, like basically you try to, I mean, I know I've heard Andrew Gelman basically not answering emails before 4 p.m., which might or might not be true. I don't know. This is just a rumor.
Oh, it's true. It's really annoying when you're collaborating with them.
Okay.
I love you, Andrew, but that's really annoying. No, it's good for him. I'm really proud of him. But if you're up against a deadline and you like need to get home.
So even deadlines, he wouldn't.
He really wouldn't.
Oh.
He really wouldn't. So, and I assume that's still true. We're not collaborating as closely right at the moment, so I don't really know. But no, I think it's good. And actually, I'm jokingly complained, but I think it's actually quite good for one's mental health. I've never been able to pull it off. But I think chunking like that is probably better than what most of us do, which is to see it, read it, think about it. Oh, I don't want to respond now. And then you do that 5 times and you've now spent 5 times as much time on that email as if you just, of course, if you answer things right away, then you just get more back. So sometimes what I do is I just answer a bunch of things and I schedule send. I also schedule send a lot more now because, to not interrupt people's weekends or whatever.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So that can be a good technique so that you're getting it done right away, but you're not getting the response back right away, which just compounds it.
But you have you schedule emailing, like this hour I'm going to do emailing, or you just
only once I get really behind. I also tell people all the time, never be afraid to ping me again, because I've got something like 70,000 emails in my inbox. So, and I also have hundreds of folders where things are filed. So it's like, if you're not in the top 50 or 100, I'm probably not going to see it. So you probably need to send it again, and I won't be offended. And I apologize that you might have to send it again. Things that I feel like are urgent, I will, but I just, there's too much. I can't respond to. Could I respond to everything? Yes. Then I would do nothing else.
Right.
So it's hard. It makes me feel like a bit of a jerk.
Emailing is an impossible business, but some people obviously also have take help from assistants and so on to schedule or reply to emails.
I don't do anything like that.
Yeah, it becomes a little impersonal, but email. And then your sense for how many, like 1 hour or 2 hours per day, like emailing, do you have allocation wise?
It depends a lot on the day. On days when I have a lot of administrative tasks, I might send 50 or 70 emails in a day. And then, on the weekend, what I'm trying to do is unless I'm really behind on emails, not sending emails on the weekend. But I don't know. It's that part of my scheduling is falling through the cracks. I don't have a great I need a better system, probably.
Yeah, interesting. And so, before we started to reach the end of the interview, Jennifer, but is there anything else related to the micro strategy that you think this is something we haven't talked about? And in the end, it is about doing the work. So is there any sort of other secret sauce that you would like to share with us on the micro strategy part before we sort of go into the end theme of this conversation?
I guess all I'd say is I feel like there's a lot of meanness in academia and a lot of needing to be right. And I'm not saying I don't suffer from the same impulses and that I'm like perfect and never fall prey to these things. I think we could all do well to be a little more humble and remember why we wanted to do this in the first place, which is not to be at the top of the heap, but just to learn interesting things and share them with the world. I think that gets lost in the shuffle too often. So kindness, humility, not people, they're not rewarded.
Yeah. No, I agree. And those are really important words. And so when it comes to the sort of ending theme is that you have already reached a lot, Jennifer. You have many more years to go. And is there anything particular that you feel like you haven't achieved at this point that you would want to dedicate more time to in your research, personal life in general, I would say?
I guess I think of it more, there's more I want to learn. So I care a lot about teaching and I put a lot of time into it and am constantly humbled at how hard it is to actually, when you actually, I've gotten better at assessing students now. And it took me a long time to realize that just because like I get along with the students and they're nice to me and maybe I get high ratings doesn't mean I'm teaching well. And so, I've started thinking much more deeply about how to teach and I want to do much more evaluation of what's the best way to teach. Like I'm fascinated by how people learn. And so, it's one of those things that, again, I've got the privilege at this point in my career to think about and study what I want. We all know teaching is not rewarded. And so I'm just going to make a choice that I'm going to spend more time on teaching and doing research that aligns with that, which is not, it's not, again, like I think being okay with making choices that are not going to get me that many Google Scholar citations or other things. If you can't use the privilege of tenure to actually do the research you care about, think about why you have that privilege.
Right. It's an excellent point. And so in terms, it sounds like teaching is very close to your heart. And in terms of teaching, what do you feel is the hardest thing? You said it's a hard thing. It's like, I mean, I think I have a hunch, but it'd be good to hear you. Like, what was
hard? I teach a causal inference class that's pretty popular. And people seem to like it, and I always thought it went well. And then I worked with a bunch of students 1 year after the class is in the fall, and in the spring we worked together to I just wanted to kind of up my game, like make my slides better, have some more current examples or whatever. And I quickly realized that these students who had all done really well in the class didn't understand some really basic concepts.
Oh, interesting.
And so I've revamped the course a lot because of that, but it's still, I get students coming in, you see people who have taken 10, 12 statistics courses, and they really can't interpret regression coefficients.
Oh, that's interesting. And these are computational sciences?
Students.
Social science, statistics?
Social science, statistics, data science.
Okay, interesting.
I think we kid ourselves that just because we've taught something once, given a homework on it and maybe a test or a project, that people actually know the things. So I think learning, you have to see it. Most people need to see most things 10, 15, 20 times. So I think we overestimate our ability for people to take things in and remember them. The other thing is that I recognized, I don't know, 5, 6, however many years ago. When we started this master's program, I was interviewing people who employ data scientists and statisticians.
Yeah.
And the biggest complaint, or one of the biggest complaints, was that they would get, so these are people more in like the social sector, so not-for-profits, NGOs, government. They would get people walking in and thinking that they could, like statisticians who had a master's degree maybe, or data scientists, and thinking, oh, I can solve this with random forests.
Right.
They would walk in with this hubris
Yeah.
and not take the time to actually get to know the organization and figure out what the actual problems were. So I created a course out of that called, motivated by that, called Data Science for Social Impact. That's really all about research practice partnerships and how do you build trust and how do you make ethical choices and all of that. All of the soft stuff, I think, is not emphasized enough, but it's hard to teach, right? So we do a lot of guest lectures. We had folks from the State Attorney General's office last week. Super interesting, super fun. So I don't know. You have to try to be humble, not be defensive, and I would encourage people to find different ways of assessing whether students are actually learning.
Yeah. Well, that's like thinking about oneself when is learning hard concepts, but it's also through the lens of the other individual that you can't really see what's going on in their mind. So that makes it by definition a very hard problem of where to sort of which keys to use to unlock this concept or that concept and so on. So Jennifer, we have basically the last question, which is a question that you get. Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a challenge. Like, what would be the challenge that you would give, the audience listening to this video? What would be the thing that you want them to take with them? Maybe do something specific, or ask them certain questions that they'll take with them. What would that be?
It really depends on the person. So I would say for anyone who's at that intersection of statistics or data science and social science, behavioral science, policy, education science, anyone, to take seriously, don't just try to answer a research question because you happen to stumble upon a cool natural experiment, or, make sure that the questions you're asking are actually relevant to a population. Like if you want to help people who you think are under-resourced or underserved, talk to people in that community and make sure that the questions you're asking are actually relevant, and that you communicate back results. I think there's a lot of time and energy spent on answering questions that I'm not sure are really going to deepen our understanding or help anyone. The other thing I'll say is if you're in a position where you can teach or mentor, take it seriously and try to get your university to take it seriously. I have not made great strides in that. It's really hard to change the culture at institutions, but anyway.
Jennifer Hill, this was a terrific moment to speak to you and learn from all the great experience that you've had and also having and also your advice moving forward. So it's been a true pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Been delightful. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.